My childhood friend stole my boyfriend. A year later, she asked me to be her maid of honor. I said yes. But there was a catch. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. My first love was stolen by the person I called my sister. A year later, she asked me to be her maid of honor. I said yes, but I had a plan. You know how they say blood is thicker than water? Well, childhood friendship felt thicker than both. At least until Madison Pierce decided my boyfriend looked better on her arm than mine. We met when we were 7, at Riverside Elementary's playground. I was the new kid, clutching my Sailor Moon lunchbox like armor, and Madison was the golden girl with perfect pigtails who actually shared her string cheese with me. 23 years of friendship, 23 years of sleepovers where we painted each other's nails, OPI ballet slipper, and whispered about our crushes. 23 years of being each other's emergency contact, each other's +1, each other's person, until she wasn't. I should have seen it coming. Madison had always been the shiny one, the girl who got picked first for kickball, who never had to raise her hand because teachers called on her anyway, who somehow made our matching Forever 21 outfits look like they came from different planets. I was the reliable one, the one who remembered birthdays, who brought tissues to movies, who held her hair back when she drank too much wine at book club. I was Emma Stone to her Blake Lively. And I was stupid enough to think that was enough. James appeared in our lives during that strange post-college phase when everyone's desperately trying to figure out what being an adult actually means. We met him at Sarah Chen's housewarming party in her cramped apartment in Williamsburg. You know, the kind where you have to take your shoes off because the floors are original hardwood, but really they're just old and scratched. He was standing by the kitchen island, wearing a navy sweater that brought out his eyes, holding a craft beer, and actually listening to whatever boring story Sarah's boyfriend was telling about his startup. Not checking his phone, not scanning the room for someone more interesting, just present. I noticed him first. That's important to remember. Madison was in the bathroom, probably perfecting her already perfect lip gloss, when I walked over and asked James what he did. He worked in sustainable architecture, which I found genuinely fascinating because I just started my job at an environmental nonprofit. We talked for 45 minutes about green building practices and whether New York would ever actually care about its carbon footprint. When Madison emerged from the bathroom, glowing like she'd been personally blessed by the Instagram filter gods, James was mid-laugh at something I'd said about my boss's obsession with bamboo everything. She glided over in that way only Madison could, like she was floating on a cloud of confidence and Marc Jacobs' daisy perfume. You must be the famous Madison, James said after I introduced them. Emma's told me so much about you. The famous Madison. I'd been talking about her because that's what you do when someone asks about your life. You mention the people in it. But seeing her beam at those words, seeing how James's attention shifted just slightly in her direction, I felt something cold settle in my stomach. All good things, I hope, she said, touching his arm lightly. Madison had perfected the art of casual touch, never aggressive, always just enough to remind you she was there. That night, James asked for my number. We texted until 2 a.m. about everything and nothing. He told me about his rescue dog, a mutt named Bowie, who was afraid of tennis balls but loved swimming. I told him about my secret dream to write a novel someday, something I'd never even told Madison. Our first date was at a tiny Vietnamese place in the village, where the PHO came in bowls big enough to swim in. He picked me up in his beat-up Honda Civic, apologizing for the mess of architectural magazines in the back seat. I loved that he didn't try to impress me with some sleek car or expensive restaurant. He was real in a way that felt revolutionary after years of dating guys who treated every interaction like an audition for their personal romantic comedy. For 3 months, we were happy. actually happy. Not Instagram happy, not performing for anyone else, just genuinely content in that way that makes you understand why people write love songs. He'd bring me coffee from the place near his office always with oat milk because he'd actually listened when I mentioned I was lactose intolerant. We'd walk through Prospect Park on Sundays, his hand warm in mine, Bowie pulling ahead on his leash toward every stick and leaf that caught his attention. Madison was supportive, of course. She always was, in that perfectly calibrated way that never quite crossed into actual enthusiasm. "He seems really nice," she'd say, scrolling through her phone while I gushed about our weekend plans. "Very stable. Stable." The way she said it made it sound like a diagnosis. "You guys are so cute together," she'd add, her smile never quite reaching her eyes. "So normal. Normal." Another word that sounded like pity in her mouth. I ignored it because I was happy, and when you're happy, you want to believe everyone else wants you to be happy too. That's the thing about people like Madison. They're masters at making you question your own perceptions while maintaining plausible deniability. The beginning of the end started at Madison's birthday party. She'd rented out the rooftop at some trendy hotel in Soho, the kind of place where cocktails cost $22 and come garnished with herbs you can't pronounce. I wore my favorite dress black, simple, flattering without being obvious. James wore the navy sweater from the night we met, and when I told him he looked handsome, he blushed in that way that made my chest flutter. Madison looked stunning, naturally. She always did, but that night she'd gone full Madison hair in perfect beachy waves, wearing this silk slip dress in emerald green that cost more than my rent. She was in her element, floating between groups of guests, making everyone feel like they were the most important person at the party. "Emma," she appeared beside me as I waited for James to return from the bar. "I'm so glad you came, and you brought James." She leaned in for a hug, and I caught a whiff of her perfume, something new, something expensive and intoxicating. "Of course. Happy birthday, Mads." "He's even better looking than in the pictures you've shown me," she said, glancing toward the bar where James was chatting with the bartender. "You really lucked out." There it was again. Luck. Like I'd won some cosmic lottery instead of simply meeting someone who appreciated me. The night progressed normally until it didn't. James and I were talking with a group of Madison's college friends when she appeared with a tray of shots. "Birthday shots," she announced. "Tequila for the brave, vodka for the boring." Everyone laughed. Madison had always been good at making meanness sound like a joke. I took the tequila, obviously. James did too, after Madison gave him a look that somehow conveyed disappointment at his hesitation. We threw them back, and Madison immediately grabbed another round. "One more for luck," she said, her hand resting on James's shoulder as she handed him the glass. By the third round, I was feeling loose and happy. By the fourth, I was definitely drunk. Madison kept them coming, always with some excuse to celebrate her birthday, to toast friendship, to honor the fact that we were all young and alive in New York City. I should have stopped. I should have paid attention to the fact that Madison seemed remarkably sober despite matching us shot for shot. I should have noticed that James was getting quieter, his responses slower. I should have been suspicious when Madison suggested we continue the party at her apartment. But I didn't, because I trusted her. Because I'd trusted her for 23 years, and that kind of trust doesn't evaporate in a single evening, no matter how many red flags are waving in your peripheral vision. Madison's apartment in the Upper East Side was everything mine wasn't: spacious, perfectly decorated, with a view of Central Park that probably cost more per month than I made in 3. Her parents had bought it for her after graduation, a casual gift that she mentioned the way other people talked about getting a nice pen. "Let me get you guys some water," she said, disappearing into her gleaming kitchen. I collapsed onto her white leather sofa, suddenly aware of how drunk I was. The room was spinning slightly, and my mouth felt cotton dry. "I think I need to go home," I mumbled to James, who was sitting beside me looking equally rough. "I'll call us an Uber," he said, reaching for his phone. "No!" Madison reappeared with glasses of water. "You can't leave yet. The night's just getting started." She'd changed into pajamas, silk ones, naturally, and her hair was down, giving her a softer, more intimate look. She settled onto the couch between James and me, closer to him than strictly necessary. "I have an idea," she said, her voice taking on that conspiratorial tone I knew so well. "Let's play truth or dare, like old times." Truth or dare. We'd played it countless times during sleepovers, usually resulting in me admitting crushes on boys who'd never noticed me while Madison got dared to call her latest admirer. It had always felt harmless then. "We're not 12 anymore, Mads." I laughed, but my voice sounded strange even to me. "Come on, it'll be fun. James, you're in, right?" James looked uncomfortable, glancing between us. "I don't know." "I'll start," Madison said, ignoring his hesitation. "Emma, truth or dare?" The smart thing would have been to choose truth. Madison knew all my secrets already, or so I thought. But I was drunk and feeling bold, so I chose dare. "I dare you to. Go get us some real drinks from the bodega downstairs. The fancy whiskey, not the cheap stuff." It was a simple dare, almost boring, but it would take me at least 15 minutes down the elevator, to the store, back up. 15 minutes alone with James, while I was too drunk to think clearly about why that might be a problem. "That's not a real dare," I protested. "It's past midnight on a Tuesday. You'll have to convince them to sell to you. That's the challenge." Madison's smile was bright and innocent. "Unless you're too scared?" I wasn't scared. I was Emma, the reliable one, the one who handled things. I grabbed my purse and headed for the door, ignoring the way the floor seemed to shift under my feet. The elevator ride down felt endless. The bodega owner did indeed require convincing, and by the time I made it back upstairs with a bottle of Jameson that cost more than my grocery budget for the week, I'd sobered up just enough to realize how stupid I'd been. I used my key Madison had given me 1 year ago for emergencies, and let myself into the apartment quietly, planning to surprise them. Maybe jump out and scare them, the way we used to do as kids. But they were already surprised, by each other. I found them on the couch where I'd left them, but everything had changed. Madison was in James's lap, her hands in his hair, and they were kissing like the world was ending. Not drunk kissing intense, focused, like they'd been thinking about it for a while. The whiskey bottle slipped from my hands and shattered on the hardwood floor, amber liquid spreading across Madison's perfect apartment like a stain that would never quite come out. They sprang apart, and for a moment nobody moved. James's face was pale with horror and guilt. Madison's was flushed, her lips swollen, but her eyes held something I'd never seen before when she looked at me. Triumph. "Emma," James started, scrambling to his feet. "This isn't... I don't know how." "You don't know how you ended up with your tongue down my best friend's throat?" My voice sounded remarkably calm, considering the way my world was crumbling around me. "That's interesting. Usually people have some awareness of their own actions. It just happened," Madison said, standing up and smoothing down her silk pajamas. She didn't look guilty. She looked satisfied. "We were talking, and there was all this tension, and..." "Tension?" I laughed, and it came out sharp enough to cut. "What kind of tension, Madison?" She had the grace to look slightly ashamed then, but only slightly. "The kind that's been there since the party. Emma, I think James and I have feelings for each other." The casual way she said it, like she was mentioning the weather, or commenting on a movie, made everything worse. Like my relationship, my feelings, my 3 months of happiness were just minor inconveniences in the grand story of Madison getting what she wanted. Feelings. I looked at James, who couldn't meet my eyes. "Is that what we're calling it?" "Emma, please," he said. "I never meant for this to happen, but Madison and we've been talking, and..." "When?" The question came out like a bullet. "When have you been talking?" The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know. "We've been texting," Madison said finally. "Just as friends at first, but then you realized you had so much in common," I finished. "Let me guess. You bonded over how normal and stable I am, how boring." "That's not fair," James said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Fair?" I laughed again, and this time it sounded slightly hysterical even to me. "You're worried about fair? You've been having an emotional affair with my best friend behind my back, and you're worried about what's fair? It wasn't an affair, Madison said quickly. We never crossed any lines until tonight. Oh, well, that makes it so much better. Thank you for clarifying that you only started physically cheating on me an hour ago. The sarcasm felt good. It felt like armor. James ran his hands through his hair, the same hair Madison had been running her hands through moments before. I think I should go. Yes, I said. I think you should. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a second I thought he might apologize. Might try to explain. Might show some small sign that our 3 months together had meant something to him. Instead, he grabbed his jacket and headed for the door, pausing only to look back at Madison. I'll call you tomorrow, he said. Not me, her. After he left, Madison and I stood in her living room surrounded by broken glass and the smell of expensive whiskey, 23 years of friendship bleeding out between us. Emma, she said softly. I know this is awful, but I think this might be for the best. For the best? I stared at her. How is this for the best? You and James, you were never really right for each other. He told me so himself. He said you were sweet, but what? She hesitated, and I saw her calculating, deciding how much damage she was willing to do. But he said he felt like he was dating his sister, that there wasn't any real passion between you. The words hit like a physical blow. He said that? Not in a mean way, she added quickly, as if that mattered. He cares about you. We both do. But Emma, you have to admit, you two were more like really good friends than lovers. I thought about James's hands in my hair, his laugh at my stupid jokes, the way he'd looked at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention. Had I imagined all of that? Had I been so desperate to be loved that I'd convinced myself it was real? And you and James are lovers? I asked. Madison blushed, and that told me everything. They hadn't just kissed tonight. This had been building for longer than she'd admitted. There's something between us, she said. Something real. Something. Passionate? I supplied. Yes. I nodded, feeling strangely calm. Well then, I guess that settles it. Emma, I don't want this to ruin our friendship. You're like a sister to me. You know that. Sister, the word she'd used to describe how James felt about me. How convenient that we were both sisters to the people we loved, right up until Madison decided she wanted them for herself. Of course, I said. We're sisters, and sisters always support each other, right? Relief flooded her face. Right. You understand. I knew you would. You're so good that way, Emma. So generous. Generous. Stable. Normal. Good. All the words people use when they mean forgettable. I helped her clean up the broken glass, cutting my finger on a shard and watching the blood mix with the whiskey on her perfect floors. She fussed over the cut, getting me a Band-Aid and apologizing again, but her apologies felt hollow now. Performative. When I finally left her apartment at 3 a.m, I knew I'd never be back. The year that followed was the worst and best of my life. Worst because I had to watch James and Madison's relationship play out on social media like some kind of romantic comedy I hadn't auditioned for. Best because I finally stopped being the supporting character in my own story. They made it official 2 weeks after that night. 2 weeks. As if they'd been respectfully waiting for the appropriate mourning period to pass. Madison posted a photo of them at some trendy brunch spot in Brooklyn, her head on his shoulder, both of them looking effortlessly happy. The caption was a quote about how love finds you when you least expect it. The comments were brutal in their kindness, all our mutual friends congratulating them, hearts and fire emojis, people saying they made such a beautiful couple. A few asked about me, where was Emma, why wasn't I commenting? But those questions disappeared quickly under the avalanche of support for Madison and James. No one asked me directly what had happened. That was the truly devastating part. In the social calculus of our friend group, it was simply understood that James had chosen Madison, and therefore Madison and James were the couple we would all rally around. I became the awkward reminder of what came before, the discarded rough draft of their love story. I stopped going to group events after the 3rd or 4th time someone mentioned how happy Madison and James seemed together, as if their happiness was a universal good that trumped any feelings I might have about the situation. I made excuses, work was busy, I was feeling sick, I had other plans. Eventually, people stopped inviting me. The isolation was crushing at first. 23 years of friendship had created a massive network of shared connections, and suddenly I was on the outside of all of it. Madison hadn't just taken my boyfriend, she'd taken my entire social world. But isolation, it turns out, can be a gift if you know how to use it. I threw myself into work with the kind of focus that surprised everyone, including me. The environmental nonprofit I worked for was small and understaffed, which meant there was always more to do than time to do it. I started staying late, volunteering for extra projects, writing grant applications that no one else wanted to tackle. My boss, Elena Vasquez, noticed. Elena was one of those women who'd fought her way to the top of a male-dominated field and had no patience for self-pity or excuses. She was exactly what I needed. "You've been different lately," she said one evening as I worked on a proposal for an urban sustainability initiative. "More focused. What changed?" I could have given her some generic answer about wanting to advance my career. Instead, I told her the truth. "I realized I'd been living my life as someone else's sidekick," I said. "I'm trying to figure out what it looks like to be the main character." Elena smiled. It was the first time I'd seen her look genuinely pleased about anything. "Good," she said. "Sidekicks don't change the world." She started giving me bigger projects, more responsibility. When the city announced a competition for a new green spaces initiative, Elena put me in charge of our proposal. It was a massive undertaking, months of research, community outreach, detailed planning documents, the kind of project that could make or break a career. I worked on it obsessively. 16-hour days, weekends at the office, research deep dives that lasted until dawn. I interviewed urban planners and environmental scientists and community activists. I learned about permeable concrete and native plant ecosystems and the economic impact of green spaces on property values. But more than that, I learned about myself. I learned that I was actually good at this work, not just competent, but genuinely talented. I had ideas that other people hadn't thought of, insights that came from years of paying attention to details that everyone else overlooked. The proposal I submitted was beautiful. Not just the content, but the presentation, carefully designed graphics, compelling photographs, a narrative that made you believe that our vision for the city's future was not just possible, but inevitable. We won. The announcement came on a Tuesday in March, almost exactly 6 months after that night at Madison's apartment. The grant was for $3 million over 3 years, and it was the largest award in our organization's history. Elena called a staff meeting to share the news, and when she announced that I would be leading the project, the entire office applauded. That night, I went home to my small studio apartment in Queens and cried for the first time since everything fell apart. But these weren't tears of sadness, they were tears of recognition. I was proud of myself in a way I'd never been before, proud of work I'd done entirely on my own, proud of a success that belonged to me and no one else. I celebrated by buying myself dinner at an expensive restaurant in Manhattan, the kind of place I'd never been able to afford before my promotion. I sat at the bar with a glass of wine, and the city spread out below me, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt completely comfortable being alone. That's when I decided to stop following Madison and James on social media. It was a small thing, but it felt revolutionary. No more checking Instagram to see their latest date night photos. No more accidentally seeing James's Facebook posts about new restaurants they were trying. No more torture disguised as staying informed. The first few days where hard muscle memory kept making me reach for my phone to check their updates. But after a week, I realized I hadn't thought about them at all. After a month, I had to actively try to remember what they looked like together. I started running. Not because I wanted to lose weight or get in shape, but because I needed something to do with the energy that used to go toward analyzing Madison's Instagram stories. I signed up for a 5K, then a 10K, then a half marathon. The physical exhaustion felt good, clean, and honest in a way that emotional exhaustion never had. I got a haircut. Nothing dramatic, just a sleeker bob that framed my face better and made me look older, more professional. The stylist, a woman named Carmen, who worked at a trendy salon in Williamsburg, convinced me to try highlights. "You've got great bone structure," she said, sectioning my hair with the confidence of someone who'd been making people beautiful for decades. "You just need to let it show." When she spun the chair around to show me the finished result, I barely recognized myself. The woman in the mirror looked sophisticated, confident, like someone who had important places to be and interesting things to say. I started taking evening classes at NYU, an urban planning certificate program that would help with my new role at work. The classes were full of mid-career professionals like me, people who were serious about their futures and interested in more than just networking. I made friends slowly, carefully, based on shared interests rather than shared history. My new life was smaller than my old one, but it was mine. Every decision I made was based on what I wanted, not what would make other people happy or comfortable. It was intoxicating. By the time Madison reached out to me, 10 months after that night in her apartment, I'd become a person I barely recognized. Confident, successful, genuinely happy in a way that didn't depend on anyone else's validation. Her text came on a Thursday morning while I was reviewing proposals for our first round of green space implementations. "Hi, Emma. I know it's been a while, but I was hoping we could talk. Would you have time for coffee this weekend?" I stared at the message for a long time, feeling nothing. Not anger, not hurt, not even curiosity. Just a mild irritation at being interrupted during work. I didn't respond for 3 days. When I finally replied, it was brief. "Saturday afternoon works. Pick a place." She chose a coffee shop in Midtown, neutral territory halfway between her apartment and my office. When I arrived, she was already there, sitting at a corner table with her hands wrapped around a mug like she was trying to warm herself. She looked diminished. Not physically. Madison would always be beautiful in that effortless way that made other women hate their mirrors. But there was something uncertain about her posture, something almost apologetic in the way she smiled when she saw me. "Emma," she said, standing up for an awkward hug. "You look amazing, really amazing." I was wearing a navy blazer over dark jeans, the kind of outfit that said I had somewhere important to be, but could spare 30 minutes for coffee. My hair was perfectly styled, my makeup subtle but polished. I looked like the kind of woman who had her life together, which, for the first time in my adult life, I did. "Thanks," I said, sitting down across from her. "You wanted to talk?" She fidgeted with her coffee cup, suddenly looking younger than her 28 years. "I wasn't sure you'd respond to my text. I almost didn't." The honesty seemed to surprise her. The old Emma would have rushed to reassure her, would have pretended everything was fine, and that I'd been busy rather than deliberately ignoring her. "How have you been?" she asked. "I heard about the grant you won. That's incredible, Emma. Really incredible." "How did you hear about it?" "Sarah mentioned it at book club. She said it was in the Times." "Of course. The New York Times had run a small piece about our project when the funding was announced. I'd been quoted as the project leader, my name and photo appearing in the paper of record alongside a description of my work as innovative and transformative. It was the first time Madison had heard my name in a professional context that had nothing to do with her. "It's been a good year," I said, career-wise, anyway. She nodded, then took a deep breath like she was preparing for something difficult. "Emma, I need to apologize for how everything happened, for how I handled it." "Okay." She seemed to be waiting for me to say more, but I didn't. The old Emma would have rushed to make this easier for her, would have said it was fine, that I understood, that these things happen. New Emma just waited. "I was selfish," she continued, "and I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared of losing James, of missing my chance with him." "Because you thought he might change his mind and realize he actually wanted to be with me?" She flinched. "That's not... I mean... Madison, you told me he said dating me was like dating his sister, that there was no passion between us. If that was true, what were you afraid of?" The color drained from her face. "I shouldn't have said that. I was trying to make you feel better about the breakup, but I realize now how awful it sounded." "Were you lying?" She hesitated just a moment too long. I was. Paraphrasing. Paraphrasing what exactly? He said. She stopped, looked around the coffee shop like she was hoping for an escape route. He said you were the kind of person he could see himself marrying someday, that you were everything he should want in a partner. Should want, but not what he actually wanted. Emma, it's fine, I said, and meant it. I'm glad you told me the truth. Finally. We sat in silence for a moment. Madison looked like she was working up to something else. The thing is, she said finally, James and I are getting married. I felt nothing, not a spike of pain, not a twist of jealousy, just a mild interest in what she would say next. Congratulations. We're having the wedding in the Hamptons. His family has a house out there. It's going to be small, maybe 60 people. That sounds nice. She was staring at me now, clearly confused by my lack of reaction. Emma, I know this is probably really hard to hear. Why would it be hard? Because you loved him. Because you might still love him. I considered this. Did I still love James? The James I'd known, the one who brought me coffee and laughed at my jokes and made me feel like I was worth choosing? That person might never have existed. The real James had been texting with Madison behind my back, comparing me unfavorably to her, seeing me as the safe choice rather than the exciting one. I loved who I thought he was, I said. But I don't think that person was real. Madison looked like I'd slapped her. He is real, Emma. He's a good person. We both are. We fell in love. Sometimes that happens. Sometimes it does. I finished my coffee and checked my watch. I should get going. I have a meeting at 4. Wait, she said quickly. There's something else. The reason I wanted to see you. I raised an eyebrow. I want you to be my maid of honor. The request was so unexpected that I actually laughed. You want me to what? I know it sounds crazy, but Emma, you're my oldest friend. You're practically my sister. The wedding wouldn't feel right without you there. I stared at her, trying to understand the logic. She'd stolen my boyfriend, destroyed our friendship, and cut me out of our entire social circle. Now she wanted me to stand beside her at the altar while she married him. Why? I asked. Because I love you. Because our friendship means more to me than any man ever could. Because I made a terrible mistake in how I handled everything, and I want to make it right. There was something desperate in her voice, something that made me look at her more closely. Madison had always been confident to the point of arrogance, secure in her place at the center of everyone's universe. But the woman sitting across from me looked uncertain, almost fragile. Have you talked to James about this? She hesitated. He thinks it might be complicated. Complicated how? He's worried it might be awkward. For you, I mean. Being there for our wedding. But you disagree. I think it would be healing, for all of us. A way to move past what happened and rebuild our friendship. I almost laughed again. She wanted me to provide her with absolution, to stand in front of all our friends and family and publicly forgive her betrayal, to smile and hold her flowers and give a speech about how wonderful she was, how perfect she and James were together, how happy I was for them. It was breathtakingly selfish, and also, I realized, an opportunity. When's the wedding? October 15th. I know it's short notice, but we didn't want to wait. October 15th. 4 months away. 4 months to plan exactly how I wanted this to go. I'll think about it, I said. Really? Her face lit up like I'd just granted her greatest wish. Emma, that would mean everything to me. Everything. I stood up, gathering my purse and jacket. I'll let you know next week. Thank you, she said, standing up too. Thank you so much for even considering it. I know I don't deserve... You're right, I said. You don't deserve it, but maybe I'll do it anyway. I left her sitting in the coffee shop, probably trying to figure out whether I'd just agreed to be her maid of honor or threatened her somehow. The truth was, I wasn't sure myself. That night, I sat in my apartment with a glass of wine and really thought about Madison's request. The old Emma would have said no immediately, would have been hurt and angry at the audacity of it. The new Emma was more calculating. What did Madison want from me? Public forgiveness, social proof that she wasn't the villain in this story, the comfort of knowing that even the person she'd wronged most was willing to celebrate her happiness. What did I want? For the first time in months, I thought seriously about revenge. Not the petty kind. I wasn't going to slash her wedding dress or sleep with James or post our private conversations on social media. But something more sophisticated, something that would give me back the power in this situation. I opened my laptop and started researching. Wedding planning websites, etiquette guides, maid of honor duties. I read about speeches and traditions, about bachelorette parties and bridal showers. I studied the architecture of a perfect wedding like I was preparing to demolish it. But as I read, a different idea started forming. Something more elegant than revenge, more satisfying than sabotage. What if I simply showed up as myself? The successful, confident, genuinely happy version of myself that I'd become over the past year. What if I was the best maid of honor Madison had ever seen? Gracious, supportive, absolutely perfect in every way, while making it clear that I had moved so far beyond our shared past that her betrayal had become irrelevant? What if my presence at her wedding wasn't about her at all, but about me claiming my place in our social world as an equal rather than a victim? I spent the weekend thinking it over, and by Monday morning, I knew what I wanted to do. I texted Madison, "I'll do it." Her response came back within minutes. "OMG, Emma, thank you, thank you, thank you. This is going to be perfect." Perfect. Yes, I thought. It would be. The next few months were a masterclass in playing the long game. Madison wanted me involved in every aspect of the wedding planning, as if my participation could somehow retroactively justify what she'd done. I went to dress fittings and tasting menus, to florist appointments and venue walkthroughs. I smiled and offered opinions and made all the appropriate noises about how beautiful everything would be, and it was beautiful. Madison had exquisite taste and an unlimited budget, and she was creating exactly the kind of wedding that would photograph perfectly and make everyone forget that the bride had built her happiness on someone else's heartbreak. The other bridesmaids were Madison's college friends and her cousin from California women who knew about me in abstract terms but had never experienced the full force of Madison's ability to rewrite history in her favor. To them, I was simply Madison's childhood friend, who was graciously participating, despite the complicated situation, with the groom. They treated me with the careful kindness reserved for the emotionally fragile, speaking in soft voices and avoiding any mention of relationships or love when I was around. It would have been insulting if it wasn't so useful. Their pity made them less likely to notice what I was actually doing. Because while Madison was planning her perfect wedding, I was planning something else entirely. I used the 4 months to transform myself completely. Not just physically, though that was part of it. I hired a personal trainer and nutritionist, upgraded my wardrobe with the help of a stylist who understood that confidence comes from wearing clothes that actually fit your body and your life. I started getting regular facials and learned how to do my makeup in a way that enhanced rather than hid my features. But the real transformation was professional. The Green Spaces project had been such a success that Elena promoted me to Associate Director of Urban Initiatives. My salary nearly doubled, and suddenly I could afford the kind of life I'd always envied from the outside the nice apartment, the good restaurants, the clothes that didn't come from discount stores. More importantly, I'd become someone people sought out for my expertise. I was invited to speak at conferences, quoted in articles, asked to consult on projects in other cities. My LinkedIn profile started getting messages from recruiters at major consulting firms and environmental organizations. I was becoming the kind of person Madison had always been, the one everyone else wanted to know, wanted to work with, wanted to be around. Except I'd earned it through actual accomplishment, rather than inherited charm and family money. The bachelorette party was my first real test. Madison had wanted something elegant, a weekend in the Hamptons with spa treatments and wine tastings, the kind of celebration that would look perfect on Instagram and make all her followers jealous. She'd rented a house in East Hampton for the weekend, a sprawling beachfront property with infinity pools and floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the ocean like a painting. I arrived Friday evening in my Tesla Model 3, another recent acquisition that had raised some eyebrows among people who remembered me as the broke girl who took the subway everywhere. The other bridesmaids were already there, drinking rosé on the deck and taking photos of the sunset. "Emma!" Madison rushed over as I pulled my bag from the trunk. "You made it! And oh my God, is this your car?" "I got it last month," I said casually. "The company has a sustainability initiative, so they offer incentives for electric vehicles." It wasn't technically a lie, my company did offer incentives. They just didn't cover the full cost of a $40,000 car. But Madison didn't need to know that my signing bonus from a consulting gig had covered the down payment. "It's gorgeous," she said, running her hand along the sleek exterior. "Very you. Very me." The way she said it made it clear she wasn't sure who me was anymore. The weekend proceeded exactly as Madison had planned. Yoga at sunrise, mimosas with breakfast, a group massage session that cost more than most people's rent. I participated in everything with enthusiasm, complimenting the wine selection and praising Madison's organizational skills, and generally being the perfect maid of honor. But I also did other things. I mentioned my upcoming TED Talk about urban sustainability, which was real. I'd been invited to speak at TEDx NYC the month after the wedding. I casually showed photos from my recent consulting trip to Copenhagen, where I'd spent a week studying their bike infrastructure program. When one of the bridesmaids asked about my dating life, I smiled mysteriously and said I was too busy with work to focus on relationships right now. "Emma's having her Elizabeth Gilbert moment," Madison said with a laugh that sounded slightly forced. "Eat, pray, love for the environmentally conscious set." "It's more like work, achieve, thrive," I said. But I can see the similarity. By Sunday morning, I could tell the dynamic had shifted. The other bridesmaids were asking me about my job, my travels, my plans for the future. They wanted to know about the Green Spaces Project, about the TED Talk, about what it was like to be quoted in the New York Times. Madison grew quieter as the weekend progressed, smiling less broadly, laughing a beat too late at jokes that weren't really funny. During our final group photo on the beach, she pulled me aside. "You seem really happy," she said. "Really. Different." "Different how?" "More confident, I guess. More sure of yourself." I looked out at the ocean, the waves rolling endlessly toward shore. "Losing you and James was the best thing that ever happened to me." She stared at me, clearly not sure if I was joking. "I mean it," I continued. "I spent so many years trying to be the person I thought other people wanted me to be. Supportive, accommodating, grateful for whatever scraps of attention I could get. But when I lost everything, I had to figure out who I actually was. Turns out, I'm pretty great." Madison's face went through several expressions: hurt, confusion, something that might have been fear. "Emma," she said carefully, "you know I never meant—" "I know exactly what you meant," I said, "and I'm grateful for it, really." I walked away before she could respond, leaving her standing alone on the beach while I went to pack my things and drive back to the city in my Tesla, to my beautiful apartment, to my successful life that belonged entirely to me. The month leading up to the wedding was electric with tension. Madison called me constantly, ostensibly about wedding details, but really to probe about my state of mind. Was I okay? Was I sure I was ready for this? Did I need to talk about anything? I was unfailingly cheerful and helpful. I organized the other bridesmaids for the rehearsal dinner. I made sure everyone had the right shoes and the right jewelry. I even helped Madison with her vows, offering suggestions that made James sound like a romantic hero rather than a man who'd emotionally cheated on his girlfriend. "You're being so amazing about all of this," Madison said the night before the wedding as we sat in her childhood bedroom in her parents' house in Connecticut. "I know it can't be easy." We were having the sleepover she'd always dreamed of, the bride and her maid of honor, staying up late and talking about love and life and the future. Except instead of feeling like sisters, it felt like a performance we were both giving for an audience of one. "It's not hard at all," I said, braiding her hair the way I had when we were kids. "I'm genuinely happy for you." "Are you dating anyone?" she asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard, partly because it was so direct and partly because of the way she asked it, like she was afraid of the answer. "No one serious," I said, which was true. I'd gone on dates, had some fun, even slept with a few people. But I wasn't looking for anything serious. I was too busy building the life I wanted to hand it over to someone else. "But you're open to it? To finding someone?" "Of course, when the right person comes along." She relaxed visibly. "Good. I want you to be happy, Emma. I want you to find what James and I have." What James and I have. The phrase stuck with me as I lay in the guest room that night, staring at the ceiling and listening to the sounds of a house preparing for a wedding. Did Madison really believe that what she and James had was love? Or was she just determined to believe it because the alternative, that she destroyed our friendship for nothing, was too painful to consider? The wedding day dawned perfect, of course. Bright blue sky, gentle breeze, temperature in the mid-70s. The kind of day that made you believe in destiny and fairy tales and the possibility that everything happens for a reason. I woke up early and went for a run along the beach, my feet pounding against the packed sand as the sun rose over the Atlantic. By the time I got back to the house, the chaos had begun. Hair and makeup artists setting up in the master bedroom, caterers arranging flowers, photographers capturing every candid moment. I slipped into my role as maid of honor seamlessly. I helped the other bridesmaids get dressed. I made sure Madison ate something before the ceremony. I held her hand while she had a small panic attack about whether her lipstick was the right shade of pink. "You look beautiful," I told her as she stood in front of the full-length mirror in her childhood bedroom, resplendent in a custom Vera Wang dress that probably cost more than my car. "James is going to cry when he sees you." She did look beautiful. Madison had always been beautiful, but on her wedding day she was luminous, glowing with the kind of happiness that made everyone around her want to bask in her light. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" she asked suddenly. "Getting married? Of course you are. You love each other." "No, I mean..." She turned to face me, and for a moment she looked like the 7-year-old girl I'd met on the playground all those years ago. "Having you here, as my maid of honor, is this too weird? Too cruel?" I considered the question seriously. Was it cruel? Or was it exactly what needed to happen? "Madison," I said, taking her hands in mine. "Look at me." She met my eyes in the mirror. "I am exactly where I want to be," I said, "doing exactly what I want to do. If that seems cruel to you, maybe you should ask yourself why." Before she could respond, her mother appeared in the doorway to announce that it was time to go. The rest of the day proceeded with the inevitable momentum of a perfectly planned event. The ceremony was held in the garden behind the house, with white chairs arranged in neat rows and an arch of white roses framing the view of the ocean. I walked down the aisle in my navy blue bridesmaid dress. Madison had chosen the color, saying it would complement everyone's skin tone, though I suspected she'd chosen it because it was safe, unremarkable, the kind of color that wouldn't draw attention away from her. I took my place at the altar and watched James take his position across from me, handsome in his custom tuxedo, nervously adjusting his cufflinks as he waited for his bride. When the music changed and Madison appeared at the back of the aisle, every guest turned to look at her. She was radiant, floating down the aisle like she'd been born for this moment. James's face transformed when he saw her, not quite the tears I'd predicted, but something close to wonder. They looked perfect together. They looked like the kind of couple that belonged on wedding blogs and in magazine spreads, the kind of couple that made other people believe in love. As the ceremony proceeded, I found myself studying them both. James, promising to love and cherish Madison for better or worse. Madison, pledging her heart and her future to the man she'd stolen from her best friend. Did they mean it? Or were they just playing the roles they'd been assigned in the story Madison had written for herself? When the officiant asked if anyone had any reason why these two should not be wed, the garden fell silent except for the sound of waves against the shore. I felt every eye in the place turn to me, waiting to see if the betrayed best friend would finally have her moment of dramatic revenge. I smiled serenely and said nothing. The reception was held under a tent on the beach, with fairy lights strung between the posts and tables, arranged around a dance floor that faced the ocean. I gave my maid of honor speech during dinner, talking about friendship and loyalty, and the importance of supporting the people you love, even when they make choices you don't understand. Madison has always been the kind of person who goes after what she wants, I said, raising my champagne glass as 60 wedding guests hung on every word. And James, you should feel honored that she wanted you, because Madison Pierce doesn't settle for anything less than exactly what she deserves. The crowd laughed and applauded, thinking they'd heard a touching tribute to the bride. Only Madison seemed to catch the double meaning, her smile freezing for just a moment before she recovered and raised her own glass in response. After dinner, I danced with James during the traditional Maid of Honor Best Man dance. He was stiff in my arms, clearly uncomfortable with the symbolism of the moment. "You look good, Emma," he said, as we swayed to some generic wedding song. "Really good. Happy." "I am happy." "I'm glad. I was worried, after everything that happened." "You were worried I'd pine away for you forever?" I laughed. "James, you did me a favor. You helped me realize I was aiming way too low." He pulled back to look at me, confused by my tone. "I used to think you were the best I could do," I continued. "A nice, stable guy who thought I was cute enough to date, but not exciting enough to really want. Thank you for showing me I was wrong." The song ended before he could respond, and I walked away, leaving him standing alone on the dance floor looking like he'd been slapped. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and champagne toasts and dancing that lasted until well past midnight. I played my role perfectly, the gracious maid of honor, the supportive friend, the woman who'd risen above petty jealousy to celebrate true love. But as the night wound down and the guests began to leave, I felt a strange sense of anticlimax. I'd expected some moment of triumph, some satisfying confrontation that would give me closure. Instead, I just felt done. Madison found me as I was getting ready to leave, still glowing in her wedding dress, but looking exhausted around the edges. "Emma," she said, grabbing my arm, "thank you for everything, for being here, for being so gracious about everything. I know it couldn't have been easy." "It wasn't hard at all," I said honestly. "I meant what I said in my speech. You got exactly what you deserve." She studied my face, still trying to figure out if I was being sincere or subtly insulting her. "Are we okay?" she asked. "Really okay?" I looked at this woman who'd been my best friend for 23 years, who'd shared my secrets and my dreams and my deepest fears, who'd held my hair when I was sick and celebrated my successes and promised to be my maid of honor someday, who'd thrown it all away for a man who'd described dating me like dating his sister. "We're perfect," I said, and then I left. 6 months later, Madison called me crying. James had been having an affair with a coworker, nothing serious, he said, just a physical thing that meant nothing. But Madison had found the texts, had seen the photos, had discovered that her perfect husband was exactly as loyal as she should have expected from a man who'd cheated on his previous girlfriend. She wanted to meet for coffee, wanted to talk, wanted my advice on whether she should forgive him or leave him. I listened to her voicemails without returning her calls. A year after that, I got a wedding invitation in the mail. Not from Madison, from Sarah Chen, our mutual friend from college. She was marrying her longtime boyfriend in a small ceremony in Vermont, and she wanted me to be there. I almost didn't go. I'd built a new life with new friends, and revisiting the old one felt like regression. But curiosity won out, and I found myself driving north on a Saturday morning in October, 2 years after Madison's perfect wedding. The ceremony was simple and sweet nothing like Madison's orchestrated perfection, but somehow more genuine. Afterward, at the reception in a rustic barn decorated with wildflowers, I found myself sitting at a table with some of our old college friends. "Emma," Jessica Martinez, Madison's former roommate, grabbed my arm as I sat down. "Oh my God, you look incredible. What have you been up to?" I told them about my work, about the TED Talk, about the book deal I'd just signed to write about sustainable urban development. They listened with the kind of attention I'd never received from this group before, asking intelligent questions and seeming genuinely impressed by my answers. "And what about your personal life?" asked Tom, Sarah's college boyfriend who'd somehow managed to stay in touch with everyone. "Anyone special?" "I'm seeing someone," I said, thinking about David, the architect I'd met at a conference in Portland. We'd been dating for 6 months, taking things slowly while we figured out how to balance 2 demanding careers. It's still pretty new. "That's great," Jessica said. "You deserve someone amazing." The conversation moved on to other topics, but I noticed something that would have devastated the old Emma and filled the new Emma with quiet satisfaction. No one mentioned Madison. Not once in 3 hours of catching up with our mutual friends did anyone bring up Madison Pierce or her marriage or her current situation. She'd been the center of our social universe for so long that her absence felt almost surreal. Later, as the reception was winding down, I found Sarah alone on the porch of the barn, looking out at the mountains in the distance. "Beautiful wedding," I told her. "You looked so happy up there." I am. She turned to me with a smile. "Emma, I'm so glad you came. And I'm so glad to see you doing so well. Thank you. I have to ask." She hesitated, then seemed to decide to just say it. "Did you know about Madison and James?" The question surprised me. "Know what?" "That they're getting divorced." I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not vindication, not even curiosity, just a mild interest in the information, like hearing about the weather in a city I'd never visited. "I didn't know," I said. "When did that happen?" "A few months ago. Apparently, it was pretty messy. She's been trying to reach out to old friends, but—" Sarah shrugged. "I think people are tired of the drama." I nodded, understanding. Madison had always been the kind of person who created chaos and then expected other people to help her clean it up. But eventually, everyone runs out of patience for that kind of friend. "She asked about you, actually," Sarah continued. "At Jessica's birthday party last month, she wanted to know if anyone had your number." "What did you tell her?" "The truth, that we weren't really in touch anymore." We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the sunset behind the mountains. "Emma," Sarah said finally, "I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For how we all handled things. When Madison and James got together, we should have, I don't know, been better friends to you." "You don't owe me anything," I said, and meant it. Everything worked out exactly the way it was supposed to. And it had. Standing there on that porch, surrounded by the warm glow of someone else's happiness, I realized that Madison had given me the greatest gift possible when she'd betrayed me. She'd forced me to stop being the supporting character in my own life and start being the hero. I drove home that night, thinking about the woman I used to be, the one who'd measured her worth by how much other people needed her, who'd been grateful for whatever scraps of love and attention came her way. That woman felt like a stranger now, someone I'd known once but had long since outgrown. My phone buzzed as I pulled into my parking garage. A text from David. "How was the wedding? Missing you." I smiled and typed back. "It was perfect. See you tomorrow." Perfect. The word Madison had used to describe her wedding day, her marriage, her life. But perfection, I'd learned, was overrated. Real life was messier, more complicated, more surprising than any fairy tale. Real life was building something beautiful from the wreckage of your old dreams. Real life was discovering that you were stronger and more interesting and more valuable than you'd ever imagined. Real life was learning that the best revenge wasn't revenge at all. It was simply living well. As I rode the elevator up to my apartment, I thought about Madison one last time. I hoped she was okay. I hoped she'd learned something from the collapse of her perfect marriage. I hoped she'd find whatever it was she'd really been looking for when she'd stolen my boyfriend and tried to steal my life. But mostly, I hoped I'd never have to think about her again. The elevator doors opened, and I stepped into my beautiful apartment with its floor-to-ceiling windows and city views, into the life I'd built with my own hands and my own dreams, and my own relentless determination to become someone worth choosing. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at the window, looking out at the lights of the city spread below me like a constellation of possibilities. My first love was stolen by the person I called my sister. A year later, she asked me to be her maid of honor. I said yes, and discovered that sometimes the best way to win is to let your enemies defeat themselves. I raised my glass to my reflection in the window, to the woman I'd become, to the life I'd claimed. "Here's to happy endings," I said to no one but myself. And then I drank.